Part 1. The House on the Hill. The Alistairs were known throughout Brenton City as one of the wealthiest and most influential families. Their Whitestone mansion stood high on the hill, overlooking the restless city like a watchful monarch. Inside, life was polished and perfect, or so it seemed from the outside. Richard Alistair, the head of the family, was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s, his dark hair just beginning to silver at the temples. He was powerful in business, feared in negotiations, and respected at every gala. His wife, Eleanor, was the definition of elegance, graceful, poised, and impeccably dressed. She was also, to those who dared whisper, icy and ambitious. The mansion's heartbeat, however, was not its owner's. It was the quiet footsteps of the staff who kept it alive. Among them was Clara, a young maid of 22 with chestnut hair and eyes the color of warm honey. She had arrived from a distant town 2 years earlier, desperate for work, grateful to be employed in the grand house. Clara was diligent, humble, and tried to keep to herself. But fate, cruel and intoxicating, had other plans. Richard noticed her almost from the start. At first, it was in passing, a kind word when she brought his tea, a lingering glance when she dusted his study. Then came the moments that made her heart race, finding him alone in the library, brushing past him in the hall, the subtle but unmistakable way his voice softened when he addressed her. Clara fought it. She knew the boundaries, the danger. But Richard was unlike any man she had met. Charming, confident, and yet oddly gentle with her. And one stormy night, when Eleanor was away at a charity event, their restraint shattered. That night changed everything. Weeks turned into months, and Clara tried to hide the truth even from herself. But the sickness in the mornings, the faint swell of her belly, and the unshakable certainty in her heart made it impossible to deny. She was carrying Richard's child. She intended to keep it secret, to leave the mansion quietly before anyone knew. But just as she was gathering the courage to go, news shook the household. Eleanor was pregnant. It was a cruel twist of fate. Clara and Eleanor's due dates fell only days apart. The tension in the house thickened, though no one but Clara and Richard understood why. Richard became distant in public, but impossibly tender when they managed to steal moments alone. "I'll take care of you," he would whisper, though the shadows in his eyes betrayed uncertainty. The night both women went into labor was a night Brenton City would never forget. The rain poured in sheets as the mansion became a flurry of activity. Upstairs, Eleanor screamed in her gilded bedroom, surrounded by the best doctors money could buy. Down in the servants' quarters, Clara labored in agony, attended only by the old cook and the gardener's wife. Hours later, Clara's cries gave way to the first breath of a healthy baby girl, tiny, perfect, and warm in her arms. Tears of relief blurred Clara's vision as she whispered, "You're mine, always." But joy in the mansion was not universal. In Eleanor's room, silence followed the doctor's final command. Her child, a long-awaited heir, had been born lifeless. Eleanor's wail was not one of grief alone. It was rage, and in that rage, she made a decision that would alter all their lives. Clara was still cradling her newborn when Eleanor appeared at the doorway, pale but burning with an unnatural fire. Richard stood behind her, his face ashen. "That child," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but firm, "is mine." Clara clutched the baby tighter. "No, she's my daughter." "You think anyone will believe a servant?" Eleanor's lips curled into a cold smile. "You'll leave this city tonight, and you'll leave without her." Clara looked to Richard, desperate. His eyes flickered with something, love, guilt, but his shoulders slumped. He said nothing. In that moment, Clara's heart broke in a way that could never be mended. Under the weight of Eleanor's threats and Richard's silence, she handed over her child. The moment the warmth of her daughter left her arms, the world seemed colder than it had ever been. By dawn, Clara was gone from Brenton City, cast out with nothing but a small bag and the ghost of her baby's cry echoing in her ears. All right, here's part 2 of your dramatic 7-part story. Part 2, The Exile. Clara's departure was silent, like the erasing of chalk from a blackboard. The rain from the night before still clung to the streets, and the wind seemed to push her farther from the hill where the mansion loomed. She walked until her legs trembled, then boarded a rattling carriage that took her beyond the city limits. She had no destination, only the crushing emptiness in her chest. The absence of her baby was like an open wound, raw and unbearable. Her arms felt useless without the weight of her daughter, her ears strained for a cry that would never come. Days turned into weeks. Clara took odd jobs in nearby towns, scrubbing floors, mending clothes, washing dishes, anything to keep a roof over her head. But each night, when the world grew still, her mind returned to that final moment in the mansion. Richard's silent betrayal, Eleanor's cold triumph, and the warm bundle she'd been forced to surrender. Back in Brenton City, the story of the Alistairs' miracle child spread quickly. The tragedy of a stillborn heir had been carefully erased. In its place bloomed the tale of a healthy baby girl, Lillian Alistair, born to Eleanor on a stormy night. No one outside the household questioned it. Lillian grew up in silk and sunshine. Eleanor adored her, not with the warmth of a mother's heart, but with the fierce pride of a victor protecting her spoils. Richard played the role of a doting father, though something in his gaze was always distant when he looked at her, as though he saw another face entirely. For Clara, years passed in a blur of work and survival. She learned to keep her pain locked deep inside, showing the world only her quiet resilience. But she never stopped counting Lillian's birthdays in her mind, never stopped wondering how her daughter's hair might curl, how her laughter might sound. One winter evening, nearly 8 years after her exile, fate brushed against her life again. She was working in a small tavern when she overheard a pair of travelers speaking about Brenton City. Their conversation drifted to the Alistairs. "That little Lillian's a beauty," one man said. "Looks nothing like her mother, more like a servant I once saw there years ago. Strange, isn't it?" Clara froze, the tray in her hands trembling. The stranger's words lit a spark she had thought long extinguished. That night, as snow fell outside her window, Clara made a decision. She would return, not as the naive girl who had been driven away, but as a woman with nothing left to lose. The journey back took weeks. She traveled by foot, then by borrowed cart, and finally, by sheer will. The city had changed, taller buildings, busier streets, but the mansion still reigned over it, untouched by time. Clara stood at the foot of the hill, her heart pounding. She could see warm lights spilling from its windows, the faint silhouette of a little girl running through the grand hallway. Her daughter. But how could she reach her? The gates were guarded, the walls high. One wrong move, and Eleanor would have her dragged away again. Clara needed allies, and she knew where to start. In the narrow lanes of the servants' quarter, she found Martha, the old cook who had been at her side the night Lillian was born. The years had stooped her back and silvered her hair, but her eyes lit with recognition the moment she saw Clara. "Child," Martha whispered, pulling her into the kitchen's warmth. "They told me you'd gone far away." "They made sure of it," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'm here for my daughter." Martha's expression darkened. "You'll have to be careful. Eleanor guards her like gold. And Richard, he's not the man he once was." Clara clenched her fists. "Then I'll take back what's mine, no matter what it costs." Part 3. The Plan. Martha poured Clara a cup of tea, though the younger woman's hands were too restless to hold it. "You can't just walk in there," Martha warned. "Eleanor would have you arrested before you crossed the threshold." "I know," Clara replied. "That's why I need a way in quietly, somewhere I can see her without Eleanor knowing." Martha hesitated, then leaned closer. "They've been searching for a new governess. Lillian's last one left suddenly. Too much tension in the house, they say. If you changed your name and altered your look, you might have a chance." Clara's heart leapt. "You'd vouch for me?" "I'll do more than that," Martha said, her voice low but fierce. "I'll make sure your name is the one Eleanor hears first." The following week, Eleanor Alistair interviewed a pale, dark-haired woman calling herself Miss Rowan. She had impeccable references, thanks to Martha's network of loyal friends, and a calm, composed manner. Eleanor, ever conscious of appearances, approved of the governess who spoke with quiet confidence and showed no trace of sentimentality. Clara stepped into the mansion with her new name, her hair dyed a deep black and her heart pounding. The corridors seemed both familiar and foreign, every detail pulling at memories she had fought to bury. When she finally saw Lillian, it was like seeing sunlight after years in the dark. The girl was 8 now, with long chestnut hair and eyes the color of warm honey. Clara's eyes. She was laughing at something Richard had said, but when her gaze fell on Clara, the laughter stopped. The girl tilted her head, studying her as if she recognized something she couldn't name. Over the next weeks, Clara became a constant presence in Lillian's life, teaching her letters, reading her stories, walking with her in the garden. Lillian was bright, curious, and startlingly intuitive. "You remind me of someone," Lillian said one afternoon as they sat by the pond. "But I don't know who." Clara smiled softly. "Maybe you knew me when you were very little." The girl nodded, as if satisfied with that answer, then skipped away to chase a butterfly. Eleanor, however, was not blind. She noticed the closeness between her daughter and the new governess, and suspicion began to coil in her mind. One evening, she intercepted Clara in the hallway. "You've made quite an impression on my daughter," she said coolly. "I do my best," Clara replied evenly. "See that you do." Eleanor's gaze was sharp as glass. "Lillian is not like other children. She's destined for great things. I won't have her distracted by unnecessary attachments." Clara forced herself to meet Eleanor's stare without flinching. "Of course, Mrs. Alastair." As Eleanor swept past, Clara exhaled slowly. Every interaction with her was a reminder that one wrong step could shatter everything. The true test came when Richard finally sought her out. He found her in the library one evening, shelving books after Lillian's lesson. The moment their eyes met, the years fell away. He looked older, wearier, but the warmth in his gaze was the same, and so was the guilt. "Clara," he breathed, as if saying her name was a relief and a curse all at once. She stiffened. "It's Miss Rowan now." "I thought you'd never come back," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." "Dangerous for who?" she asked, her voice edged with steel. "For me? Or for the lie you've been living?" Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I never stopped." He cut himself off, glancing toward the door. "We can't talk here. Not yet." Clara's pulse quickened. For the first time in years, she felt the threads of the past and present knotting into something unavoidable. Part 4. Shadows in the Mansion. Days passed, each one tightening the invisible web between Clara, Richard, and Eleanor. Clara played her role with flawless precision, never revealing more than she should, but the weight of secrets grew heavier. Richard began finding small ways to help her, quietly extending Lillian's lessons so Clara could spend more time with her, arranging for books that told stories of mothers and daughters, subtly hinting at truths without saying them aloud. But his every kindness was shadowed by fear. Eleanor's reach was long, and her temper was legendary. One rainy evening, Clara walked Lillian back from the garden and noticed Eleanor watching them from the veranda. Her expression wasn't merely suspicious, it was calculating. That night, Clara overheard raised voices behind the locked doors of the master bedroom. "You're imagining things," Richard said, his tone calm but strained. "I know what I see," Eleanor replied sharply. "That woman has a hold over Lillian. It's unnatural. She's doing her job. Don't patronize me, Richard. I won't have another woman in this house trying to." Eleanor stopped, but her words were thick with unspoken meaning. Clara's heart pounded. She pressed her back against the wall, every nerve screaming that Eleanor's suspicion was inching closer to the truth. The breaking point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while cleaning the shelves in the study, Clara found an old photograph tucked between books. It showed Richard, much younger, standing beside her on the steps of the servants' quarters, both smiling shyly at the camera. She remembered that day. It had been taken by the gardener's boy, just weeks before everything fell apart. But what made her breath catch was the corner of the photograph, a tiny hand, barely visible, reaching out from a bundle in her arms. The infant's face was hidden, but the date scrawled on the back left no doubt. It was the night Lillian was born. Richard had kept it all these years. That evening, she confronted him in the library. "You kept this," she said, placing the photograph on the desk. Richard looked at it for a long time before speaking. "I couldn't throw it away. It's all I had left of you. Of her." Clara's throat tightened. "Then why didn't you fight for us?" His hands clenched at his sides. "Because Eleanor would have destroyed you. And I was a coward." Her voice shook with anger. "And now my daughter thinks I'm no one." Richard stepped forward, his voice low. "What if it didn't have to stay that way?" Before Clara could answer, the library door swung open. Eleanor stood there, her gaze flicking between them and the photograph still lying on the desk. The silence was electric. "What?" Eleanor said slowly. "Is that?" Neither answered. Eleanor crossed the room, her eyes narrowing as she picked up the photograph. For a long moment she studied it. Then she looked at Clara with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think," Eleanor said softly, "it's time we had a little talk. Just you and me." Part 5. The Confrontation. Eleanor led Clara into the small, dimly lit sitting room at the far end of the mansion, a place rarely used except for private conversations that weren't meant to be overheard. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, and the only light came from a single lamp on the table. "Sit," Eleanor commanded. It was not a request. Clara lowered herself into the chair, keeping her posture straight, her face unreadable. Eleanor circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You've been very clever," Eleanor began, her tone smooth as silk. "Changing your name, altering your appearance. I almost admire it." She stopped in front of Clara. "But you made one mistake. You thought you could hide the way you look at her." Clara didn't answer. Her heart thudded in her chest, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "Lillian deserves to know the truth." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "The truth is what I say it is. She is my daughter, mine in name, mine in law, mine in every way that matters." "She is my flesh and blood," Clara shot back. "And nothing you do can change that." Eleanor leaned closer, her voice a deadly whisper. "If you value her life, you will leave again. Quietly. Permanently. Because if you stay, I will make sure she grows to hate you." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Clara's pulse raced, but she didn't look away. "You took her from me once," Clara said finally. "Never again." Eleanor smiled coldly, as if amused by the challenge. "You think Richard will protect you? He's weak. Always has been. And when he's forced to choose, he will choose me. He always does." Without another word, Eleanor swept from the room, leaving Clara alone in the heavy quiet. That night, Clara lay awake in her small bedroom at the top of the servants' wing, staring at the ceiling. She could feel the clock ticking, time running out. If Eleanor had truly recognized her, it was only a matter of days before she acted. She needed proof, something undeniable that Lillian was hers. Only then could she fight back. The idea came to her when she remembered the midwife from that night, an older woman named Agnes, who had been dismissed from the city soon after the birth. If she could find Agnes, she might have a witness to the truth. The next morning, Clara told Lillian they would be taking their lesson outside the mansion. She had arranged a field trip under the guise of history studies, but in reality, she was planning to use the trip to gather information in the city and maybe find Agnes. They were halfway through the bustling market streets when Clara felt someone watching her. Turning, she saw a man in a dark coat lingering by a fruit stall. His eyes locked on hers for a moment before he disappeared into the crowd. Clara's stomach dropped. She had been followed. When they returned to the mansion, Eleanor was waiting in the foyer, her smile sharp as glass. "I trust you enjoyed your outing?" she asked sweetly. "Yes, Mrs. Alastair," Clara replied, forcing calm into her voice. "Good, because it will be your last with her. From now on, Lillian's lessons will take place under my supervision." The message was clear. Eleanor was tightening the leash. Clara was running out of time. Part 6. The Turning Point. Clara knew Eleanor would not stop until she was gone again, this time forever. That night, as the mansion slept, she slipped from her room and made her way through the servants' corridor to Martha's quarters. "I have to find Agnes," Clara whispered, closing the door behind her. "She's the only one who can prove Lillian is mine." Martha frowned. Agnes moved to a small village outside the city, but getting there without Eleanor knowing. "I'll manage," Clara interrupted, determination in her eyes. "I'll leave before dawn and be back before anyone notices." Martha pressed a slip of paper into her hand. Her address. "But Clara, be careful." The next morning, Clara claimed she was going to a supplier to collect new lesson materials. She left the mansion quickly, her heart pounding as she made her way to the edge of the city and boarded a cart heading toward the village. The journey took hours. The countryside rolled past, quiet and still, a stark contrast to the storm raging in her thoughts. When she finally reached the village, she found Agnes's small cottage tucked behind a grove of apple trees. The midwife answered the door, her hair white now, but her eyes still sharp. Recognition flared the moment she saw Clara. "My dear, I wondered if you'd ever come," Agnes said softly. I remember that night like it was yesterday. Then you know the truth, Clara replied. Will you testify if I need you? Agnes didn't hesitate. I will. Clara left the cottage with hope for the first time in years. She had a witness, a lifeline. But when she returned to the city, her relief vanished. The mansion's front drive was crowded with servants, and Eleanor stood in the doorway, her face pale but furious. There's been an accident, she said. Lillian fell from her horse. Clara's breath caught. Where is she? In her room. The doctor says she'll recover, but she's been asking for you. Eleanor's lips curled in disdain. Strange, isn't it? She should be calling for her mother. Clara didn't wait for permission. She ran upstairs. Lillian lay in bed, her arm in a sling, a shallow cut along her cheek. But her eyes lit up the moment she saw Clara. I was scared, the girl whispered. I wanted you. Clara knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'm here. I'll always be here. From the corner of her eye, Clara saw Richard standing in the doorway. His gaze moved from Lillian to Clara, and something hardened in his expression. Eleanor's gone too far, he said quietly. I won't let her hurt you, or her again. Clara straightened. Then help me. Agnes will swear the truth. But we need to act before Eleanor finds a way to silence her. Richard nodded slowly. Tomorrow. We'll end this tomorrow. But tomorrow came sooner than they expected. That night, Clara woke to the sound of voices in the hallway. She slipped to her door and listened. Leave tonight, Eleanor's voice hissed. Take the child and go to my sister's estate. I'll deal with the governess when you're gone. Clara's blood ran cold. Eleanor wasn't just trying to separate them. She was planning to take Lillian away entirely. Part 7. The Truth Unleashed. Clara didn't wait until morning. She slipped from her room and made her way to Richard's study, tapping softly on the door until he opened it. She's leaving tonight, Clara whispered urgently. With Lillian. Richard's jaw tightened. Then we stop her tonight. They moved quickly, Richard ordering the night staff to delay Eleanor's preparations while Clara ran to Martha's room for the address Agnes had given her. We need her here now, Clara said. She's the only one who can end this. Richard sent his most trusted driver to fetch Agnes under the cover of darkness. Meanwhile, Eleanor, growing impatient, came downstairs with Lillian in tow, the child sleepy and confused. Where are we going, Mother? Lillian asked. Somewhere safer. Eleanor replied smoothly, though her eyes darted toward Clara, who had just entered the foyer. Clara stepped forward. She's not going anywhere. Eleanor's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Still pretending you have any authority here? Richard, tell her to stand aside. But Richard didn't move. Instead, he stepped beside Clara. I've been silent too long, Eleanor. Tonight, the lies end. The front doors opened, and Agnes entered, her presence commanding in its quiet certainty. I was there the night this child was born, she said, her voice steady. I delivered 2 babies, one stillborn, one living. The living one is this girl. And she came from Clara. Gasps rippled through the gathered staff. Lillian's eyes went wide as she looked from Eleanor to Clara. That's absurd. Eleanor snapped, though her voice trembled. She's lying. Agnes reached into her bag and pulled out a small bundle of cloth, a faded baby blanket. This was wrapped around her when I handed her to her mother. Clara's initials are stitched into the corner. Lillian stepped forward, touching the worn fabric. You're my real mother? She whispered to Clara. Clara knelt, her eyes shining with tears. Yes, sweetheart. I am. Eleanor's composure shattered. She's mine, she screamed, lunging toward Lillian, but Richard caught her arm. No, he said firmly. You took her from the woman I loved. You used my silence to keep your lie alive. I won't protect you anymore. The room fell silent except for Eleanor's ragged breathing. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had lost. In the days that followed, Richard filed for legal custody in Clara's name, presenting Agnes's testimony and the blanket as proof. The court ruled swiftly in Clara's favor. But here came the twist no one expected. Clara refused to move back into the mansion. Instead, she took Lillian to a small house on the edge of the city, far from the Alastair wealth and influence. We'll make our own life, she told her daughter. One that no one can take away from us. Richard visited often, trying to repair what years of silence had broken, but Clara kept her boundaries firm. I'm grateful for what you did at the end, she told him one afternoon. but I can't forget what you didn't do at the start. Eleanor left the city in disgrace, her name whispered with contempt instead of envy. One crisp autumn morning, Clara watched Lillian run through the yard, her laughter filling the air. For the first time in years, Clara felt whole, not because she had regained her daughter, but because she had built a life free of control, deceit, and fear. The Alastair mansion still stood on the hill, but to Clara, it was just a shadow of a life she had left behind forever. She had won, not through wealth or power, but through truth. And this time, no one could take it from her.